Cabinet Office Minister Sally Jameson has been speaking to Callum MacDonald, and Rosie write about it on Times Radio Breakfast.
Of course, there's still going to be huge parts of government that's done in London and done in Whitehall, but this is about making sure that the economic decisions and decisions around growth and around regions is done outside of the Millbank area.
That was Sally Jameson speaking to Times Radio Breakfast, and you can join Times Radio Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. So, number 10 North. What do you think, Lara?
Well, I mean, we're going to see a lot of it today because Andy Burnham is up there. He'll be working there for the first time today. He'll be hosting a meeting of the NEC, which is a cabinet committee, an economic cabinet committee, which has been revived. The National Economic Council. Exactly. I think many people remember it from the kind of post-financial crash era when Gordon Brown chaired it, but Burnham seemingly bringing it in Manchester in particular, because we know that devolution, local growth are topics that Number 10 North, areas that Number 10 North is going to have significant control over going forward. So I think today is a really important day, kind of the launching of Number 10 North, you might say, given that this is going to be Burnham's first big day working there. We know now that there are other senior members of the government, particularly Louise Haigh, who is of course the Chancellor of Archbishop of Lancaster, as well as First Secretary of State, will also be spending time working there, and a number of cabinet ministers will be there for the meeting today. So a big showing for Number 10 North. Of course, Andy Burnham wants to see off any accusations that this is a gimmick. He said explicitly it's not a gimmick, but of course he needs to show that this is an office which is actually making genuinely important decisions and is a kind of is not just an outpost. It's a really important manifestation of Number 10, albeit in a different location from the original. And
he's also moved the desks around at Number 10.
Yes, according to Patrick Maguire, our colleague, that Antonio Romeo, the Cabinet Secretary, has a desk right outside his office, a symbol, of course, of the importance of the Prime Minister's authority going forward. We know, of course, there's the Office of the Prime Minister, that there's a number of Whitehall changes which are designed to embolden Andy Burnham in particular, particularly in areas like economic policy, but not exclusively so, and that will be a big feature, I think, going forward.
So how do you think the first week has gone? What's your kind of take on his first week?
Yeah, I mean, what do I think about the first week? I think that if you look at the grid, they have managed to implement a grid. They've done the reshuffle. They've done the junior ministers reshuffle, which is complete now. They've obviously done the appointment of the cabinet, which is complete as well. We had a hiccup from Darren Jones, of course, who was ousted as a cabinet minister and who accused the new government of making an unfunded commitment on scrapping ID cards and using that money to pay for a cut on VAT to energy bills. So I think it's fair to say that not all of the quote-unquote Starmerites have been massively impressed with this first week. There has been bad blood created. I think, though, that those around Burnham were always expecting there to be some bad blood from the first week because they were always expecting to be making significant changes to the top of government. But the question, of course, is just how embittered some of them are. What's interesting, actually, if you look at the cabinet, is Starmerites have been completely purged, but actually the junior ministerial ranks have kept quite a lot of people in place. That's actually created its own weird problem, which is that actually you have some people who feel that they are very loyal and helpful to Andy Burnham who've actually not been given junior ministerial jobs in favour of some who they feel might be more loyal to Keir Starmer. So I think those things are not, I mean, they're really not damning for a first week. The question is, of course, whether or not they fester or whether or not Andy Burnham is able to address them. But he's obviously made these announcements. We haven't seen, I think it's fair to say, Ed, a great deal of him by way of sort of media scrutiny this week.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because there's an element of sort of control, which, from his perspective is a good thing. One is the 6 o'clock news drop. So suddenly they control the news agenda for the day because they drop a big announcement at 6 o'clock in the morning. He hasn't taken many questions from journalists. He's put Antonio Romeo in the room next door to signal his control of the civil service. So it's all about him setting the agenda and showing he's in charge.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that they will look to be doing more in the media in the coming weeks for sure, but there is a question about just how much he's facing this week. Now, they would say he's had a lot of announcements to do. He's made near daily announcements on the cost of living, for example. You've referenced them in your introduction, Ed, and obviously there are questions about precisely how all of those will be funded, but at the moment I think they want to get through these first 2 weeks, which is what I'm told the initial grid covered was the first 2 weeks before Andy Burnham came in. They really want to signal that they're doing stuff on the cost of living, and that I think facing kind of grueling media interviews at this time probably is more of a risk than it would be a benefit, particularly because they're trying to do something separate, of course, which is a communication strategy where he's on social media a lot, he's doing his own camera pieces, he's talking to influencers, etc. Now, Starmer did try to do parts of that, but I think it's not to say that Andy Burnham has not been on our screens this week. He's been very present, but he has not been doing your traditional media interviews in the same way as perhaps some of his predecessors might have. That's not to say that, I mean, he did 4 questions in a media huddle on Monday in the Rose Garden with political editors, at which, he made quite significant news on a number of different topics. And we've had this question this week about, for example, the personal allowance and whether or not Andy Burnham might be looking at changing the threshold on that. What's quite interesting about his answers on that, because, that's kind of been ruled in and out at various points, is that he's essentially saying quite openly, I'm going to do media in a different way. I haven't made my mind up on this. We haven't made our minds up on this. And you might get a new style of communications, which is actually a bit more evolving, so to speak, in these areas. And I think probably it's fair to say that, this is a government who, for most of the people at the very top, had absolutely no idea what positions they'd be in come Monday. So it's fair to say that, we're not necessarily going to see masses of them immediately because people are getting to grips with their brief. Andy Burnham and some of the people around him were expecting perhaps something like a September timetable for taking over. He's actually taken over quite quickly. It's not that easy, they would say, to do a transition to government. So I think some people would say you might want to be a bit more kind about the absence of grueling interviews perhaps in the first week, but let's see what comes in the coming days as well.
Somebody's texted in and said, what's a grid?
That's a great question. A grid is essentially maps announcements and events that the government is planning on doing over a specified period of time. It's got a sort of mythical
status in Whitehall. It was a sort of invention of Blair, and it was about how clever they were at controlling the news agenda, that they could make loads of announcements. And every day they knew what they'd be saying, but of course events knock the grid off track often. And lots of people texting in with cynicism about number 10 North. Are we entitled to be a little cynical that number 10 in the North just happens to be where he lives? Is this a ruse for working from home? And Manchester isn't the North anyway. I wonder if he would be so keen if number 10 were in Newcastle, for example. Well, it's another top-tastic Trump tariff summer. The US is imposing a new 10% tariff on UK goods, along with imports from almost 60 other trading partners. The basis for these tariffs are claims that the countries concerned haven't done enough to tackle forced labour in global supply chains. David Henig is director of the think tank, the European Centre for International Political Economy, and he joins me now. Welcome to the show, David.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to follow somebody I follow on X. I love David Henig's X's. Always good on trade policy. Tell us about these brand new tariffs. It's an excuse for Trump to get round the Supreme Court judgment against him.
Meet the new tariffs, pretty much the same as the old tariffs, I think, as the Who didn't quite sing. So these replace the Section 122 tariffs, which in turn replaced the tariffs on Emergency Powers Act, which were ruled unlawful by the Supreme Court. Now, each time this happens, they change a little bit. So on this occasion, the UK faces a tariff of 10% plus whatever we would have paid normally. The EU will face a tariff of maximum 10%. So we're slightly behind the EU. Previously, we were slightly better off than the EU. There are still also some exemptions, such as Scotch whisky. So the King's trade deal holds. And I think the final immediate point to note about all of this is that there's also lots of other exemptions as well. So it's not that every good that the UK exports to the US is hit with this 10% tariff. President Trump has put all manner of exemptions in to actually support the US economy. So it's a pretty complex picture.
And in terms of a complex picture, are the tariffs paying off for Donald Trump? I read somewhere that he's generated about 5% of government revenues through tariffs. Is this a sustainable policy?
Well, he's raising certainly quite a lot of money now. The economists will say he's raising the money, but he's also suppressing the growth of the US, and therefore he's also losing money at the same time. But obviously, this is money straight into the government coffers, and it's certainly being argued that his successors would find it difficult to remove the tariffs and to find an alternative source of income. And I think that's probably true. So it may well be that even though future US presidents are unlikely to be as supportive of tariffs as President Trump, that we may have to get used to them for quite the duration.
And also there's a geopolitical element here as well, because a number of kind of goods exported from China. China's the share of exports that is in the US for China has dropped from something like 13% to 8%. So in that sense, Trump is also a winner.
Well, Trump wants to build more in the US and to import less from China. Now, it's not entirely clear that he's actually succeeding in that. So there are far fewer direct US imports from China, but the figures seem to suggest there's a lot more indirect via, for example, Mexico or various other countries. Now, President Trump is trying to crack down on that as well, but it's not necessarily succeeding. So in the broader political objectives that the president has, such as bringing back manufacturing jobs to the US, it's not clear that he's definitely succeeding in achieving that. And there's a little bit of a read across to UK policy as well, because if President Trump can't bring back manufacturing jobs to the US, could the UK really do the same here? It's not really clear that that would be achievable.
And in terms of Trump leverage using tariffs, for example, the Americans might argue that the UK's digital services tax is a kind of tariff. The European Commission has just whopped a $900 million fine on Google. Will they use these tariffs as leverage to effectively, in their eyes, protect American tech companies?
Well, there's a lot of threats going around from the US about the way that the Europe in general is treating US services companies. Now, we already recall that in order to have zero pharmaceutical tariffs, the UK was required to change the way the NHS pays for drugs and to increase the prices. So it's quite possible there will be more threats, which is why we can't say for certain that these latest round of tariffs, that's it for the next couple of years. This is President Trump. We can expect more threats. We can expect potentially, more higher tariffs raised with certain pretext, and then potentially withdrawn if we give concessions. So unfortunately, we're going to still have to be on our game with regard to the US. It doesn't all end today. I think we learn with Trump it never really all ends in terms of tariffs, at least.
It is never-ending, but what is interesting about today's announcement, as it were, is that there's been a sort of shrug of the shoulders here in the UK. I think there's an estimate from Alliance Trade and Insurance Company that it could reduce our exports by around $200 million a year, but that's not a huge amount. And so this is the new normal, but it's less impactful perhaps on the UK economy, and we're having less of a nervous breakdown than we did last year.
I think all of the exemptions that President Trump has put in place, for example, at the moment there's a large number of exemptions on pharmaceuticals, large number of exemptions on aircraft-related products. There's exemptions now on whiskey. Well, that's actually an awful lot of our trade is in those sorts of products. Now, there are other food and drink products that are where people are suffering. But the main export line items have been exempted from these tariffs, and that's why the figure isn't quite as bad as it might be. But once again, as often happens, it will be the smaller exporters that are hit. They will be facing higher tariffs in many cases that they can't get around. So probably the large companies have found ways around it. The small companies may be hit more.
Well, there you go. Thank God we're still in the single market. Eh? Oh, no, we're not. David Henig is director of the think tank, the European Centre for International Political Economy. Thank you for coming on and talking about the impact of Trump's new round of tariffs. Now back to Lara Spirit. I don't know whether, Lara, you paid much attention given how much Andy Burnham is dominating the news, but the Conservative Party chairman and Cabinet Minister Sir Grant Shapps has been blocked by Kemi Badenoch from being a Tory candidate in the next election. This is because she wants a brand new party full of new people. What are the implications of this?
Yeah, so this is, I actually interviewed Kemi Badenoch on last Friday, and she spoke about the fact that even though they're not calling for a general election under Andy Burnham, the Conservative Party is getting ready for one nonetheless, and part of that is a big push on candidates. And one of the big things that we've read in The Spectator this week is, like you say, that some who have previously represented not just the Conservative Party as MPs, but as very senior ministers. I think Grant Shapps has held something like 9 ministerial portfolios previously.
5 cabinet posts.
And he is being barred. Now, she is not saying explicitly, she's not commenting on personnel, but she's saying we're changing policies, we're changing people, we're changing process. So clearly they do want to have a kind of fresh face. One of the things that she wants to put in place is a kind of pledge, a sense that actually you have to agree to, for example, abandoning net zero climate policies, withdrawing from the ECHR if you're to be able to stand. But I think it's widely understood that that's not really the reason why Grant Shapps, for example, would have been barred. I think that probably you would expect that has something to do with wanting to look like the party is a kind of fresh face. But I don't know, what do you think?
I think it's a dumb and idiotic decision, and I can't quite believe she's done it. Because Grant Shapps is a very experienced cabinet minister. I find it amazing that he still wants to be a Tory MP, but if he does, he should be welcomed back as a potential candidate. He won his seat in Welwyn Hatfield off Labour long before the tide swung back to the Conservatives. He's a brilliant campaigner. He runs something called Conservatives Together, which has an ambition to train up to 500 Conservative candidates in time for the next election. He's put his shoulder to the wheel for the Conservative Party, and Kemi has banned him. Perhaps she thinks he might be a leadership rival after the next election. It's absurd. It's a kind of pathetic attempt to kind of, I don't know, eradicate. It's a bit smacks of when Theresa May got rid of all the Cameroonians, and not quite Andy Burnham getting rid of all the Starmerites, but it just sends a very, very bad signal for people who've worked extremely hard for the Conservative Party for many, many years and are then just chucked out on the whim of the current leader.
Right, so you do actually have quite a strong view on that.
I don't really know what I think about it, Lara.
It's not usually the response I get when I ask what you think about
That's
something.
just an initial thought. No, I'm really angry about it. They've taken the whip away from Gavin Barwell in the House of Lords as well. Again, a man who's been a Conservative MP, worked for the Conservative Party for 30 years because they think he wasn't very nice to the leader in some of his tweets. I mean, the Conservative Party is a broad church, and, you know, in 1997, when William Hague became leader, I criticised quite a lot of what William Hague did as leader. No one ever dreamt of saying to me I couldn't be a Conservative candidate, and, you know, one wants the Tory party to be in there. Anyway, I could go on.
You could go on. I mean, his seat is eminently winnable as well. I think he lost it by less than 4,000 votes.
Yeah, he's
in
a very. I
2024.
mean, he turned Welwyn Hatfield, which was a Labour seat, into a rock solid Tory seat until obviously the pendulum has swung too far. Well, we'll see where this goes, because, you know, Kemi Badenoch is riding high at the moment, but if she gets into trouble in the future, she might find she's got fewer friends than she did last week. So it seems a completely positive. It was like when she's criticised David Gauke for getting a knighthood. What's all that about?
Lisa in the comments agrees with you. I agree with you, Ed. I don't like this. Petty and shows weakness.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. She's always great, Lisa. She agrees with me about 9 times out of 10. Anyway, Lara Spirit, thank you so much for coming on the show. That's Lara Spirit, Deputy Editor, Political Editor at the Sunday Times.